Hey guys, tonight we will step into a quiet, mysterious tale that will gently carry you into a world of reflection and emotions. Close your eyes, take slow, deep breaths, and with each exhale, feel the tension leaving your mind. Let your heart feel calm, your thoughts drift softly, and every sound, every word of tonight's story guide you into a serene, almost magical world. Let's begin the story. The night had just begun to settle over the quiet village of Hereford. The moon floated low, heavy with silver light, painting every roof and tree in a pale glow. The wind moved gently through the streets, carrying the faint scent of earth and wood smoke. It was a peaceful night, or at least it should have been. At the edge of the village stood an old wooden post box, its paint faded and peeling. No one used it anymore. Letters hadn't been delivered here in years. But tonight, as the clock struck 11, a single envelope appeared, quietly, as if placed by an unseen hand. The letter was sealed with black wax, imprinted with a crescent moon and a whispering flame. There was no sender's name, only a few soft words written in flowing ink. To those who remember, the feast awaits. The next morning, old Clara found it. She was the village caretaker, a woman with eyes like mist and a heart full of forgotten stories. Her trembling fingers brushed the envelope, and for a moment, she thought she heard something. A faint hum, like a voice breathing from within the paper itself. She took it to the town square, where the people of Hereford gathered once a week. No one spoke at first. They simply stared at the letter, its presence quiet but heavy, like a memory returning uninvited. "It's an invitation," Clara whispered. "But from whom?" The baker, Thomas, frowned. "There hasn't been a feast here in years, not since." He stopped. The others knew what he meant. The last feast had ended in silence, on the night when the oldest families of the village had vanished without a trace. By evening, the village gathered again, this time around the fire pit near the chapel. The letter lay open on a wooden table. Its handwriting shimmered faintly in the firelight, as though the ink itself breathed. To all who dwell between memory and dream, it read, "You are invited to the feast of spirits beneath the waning moon. Bring what you cherish, leave what you fear. The table remembers every soul." The crowd fell silent. Only the fire crackled, small sparks drifting upward like fireflies. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, what does it mean? The table remembers." No one answered, because deep inside, everyone already knew. Every year, at the end of autumn, the air in Hereford grew strange. Colder, softer, filled with whispers. It was said that the dead returned to share one night with the living. To eat, to remember, to forgive. But this time, no one had prepared the table. No one had called them. And yet, someone, or something, had sent the invitation. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept the letter beside her candle, watching the wax seal gleam faintly in the dim light. Outside, the wind rose, and she could swear she heard voices. Soft, distant, like guests arriving in the dark. "The feast awaits," the wind seemed to whisper. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, the air inside her home smelled faintly of lavender and ash. The scent of her late husband's favorite dish, long since forgotten until now, somewhere beyond the fields. Beneath the roots of the old chapel, a single candle flickered to life on a long, dusty table. Plates began to shimmer. Cups filled themselves with invisible wine, and shadows, thin as breath, took their seats, waiting for the living to arrive. The morning came heavy and pale. Mist hung low over Hereford, swallowing the houses in slow-moving waves. The village, usually alive with the sound of carts and roosters, was eerily still. Even the dogs did not bark that day. Clara stepped outside her cottage, clutching her shawl close against the chill. The letter from the previous night still burned in her thoughts. She'd placed it on her kitchen table, yet she could swear she heard it move during the night. A faint rustle, like paper breathing. The cobblestone road glistened with dew as she walked toward the square. Her shoes made soft sounds, tap, 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 echoing louder than they should have. When she reached the center, she found something that made her heart skip. Every door in the village was closed, every curtain drawn. No one stood outside, and yet she felt watched. The air was thick, not empty, but full of whispers too soft to hear clearly, like a language spoken underwater. She stopped at the old chapel. The door, always locked, stood slightly open. The wooden frame groaned as the wind pushed against it, and she saw, inside, a single candle burning on the altar. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't lit that candle. No one had. The flame was steady, too steady, like it belonged to a room that wasn't truly part of this world. By noon, a few villagers had gathered in the square again. Thomas the baker, young Mira, the blacksmith Owen, and Father Elric, the old priest. They stood in a circle, speaking softly, their words wrapped in fear. The invitation was not for us, Father Elric murmured. It was for them. Owen frowned. Them? You mean the dead? The priest nodded, his eyes pale and distant. This village was built on an older ground. There were feasts here long before our time. Offerings, songs, names carved into stone. The invitation, it may have been written by those who remember the old ways. A long silence followed. No one wanted to believe it, but no one could deny the feeling in their bones. The quiet pull, like being called by a forgotten name. Thomas glanced around. Then why send the letter to us? Elric sighed. Because they cannot eat without us. The day passed in strange half-light. The sun hung low and cold, and the shadows grew long before their time. Clara stayed near her window, watching the street. Not a single bird crossed the sky. Even the wind had gone still, as if the entire village was holding its breath. And then, just as dusk began to fall, she saw them. Figures, faint, almost transparent, walking along the road that led to the chapel. They didn't walk like the living. Their steps made no sound. Their bodies swayed as if moved by unseen tides. Clara pressed her hand to the glass. Her heart trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. She knew those faces, not all, but some. Old neighbors, gone for years. The baker's wife, the shoemaker's child, her own husband, Elias. He turned his head slightly, and though his eyes were as soft and hollow as the mist, he smiled. The same tender smile he used to give her when returning home at dusk. Her knees weakened. Tears welled up before she even knew she was crying. Elias, she whispered, but he did not answer. He simply turned and continued walking toward the chapel, where the candle still burned. By nightfall, every home in Hereford was lit, not by lamps, but by small, pale lights that seemed to appear on their own. Some flickered in windows. Some hovered above doorsteps. Some floated quietly down the road like drifting stars. Mira stood at her doorway, clutching her little brother's hand. He pointed toward the old graveyard on the hill. Look, he whispered. From the earth, faint glows began to rise. Blue, white, soft gold, like fireflies being born from the ground. And then came the sound. A hum. Low, harmonic, sorrowful. It was not a song made by instruments, but by memory. The kind of melody the heart remembers even when the mind forgets. The villagers listened, frozen. Some wept quietly. Some closed their eyes and whispered names long lost. The dead were coming home. Clara knew what would happen next. Her grandmother used to tell her stories. Tales of the night of returning, when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, and those who still remembered were invited to share one final meal. She gathered a few things, a loaf of bread, a silver cup, a lock of her husband's hair she'd kept for years. Her hands trembled as she placed them in a small basket. Outside, the road shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The air was cool and heavy, carrying with it the smell of lilies and old rain. One by one, the villagers stepped out of their homes, each holding a token, something from their lost ones. A photograph, a scarf, a broken pendant, a letter. They said nothing to one another, but their steps fell in rhythm, as if answering an ancient call. And from the distance, beneath the chapel's arched doorway, a table began to glow. It stretched far longer than it should have. A wooden table, worn but beautiful, lined with empty chairs that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Silver plates reflected faces that were not truly there. Cups filled themselves with wine as dark as night. And between every two chairs, a faint shadow sat, waiting. When Clara approached, the candlelight shifted, and she could feel a pulse beneath her feet, as if the ground itself were breathing. She placed her basket on the table. The loaf of bread was still warm. The silver cup glinted softly. The lock of hair caught the moonlight and shimmered gold. And then, just as she took her seat, the air grew warm, and she wasn't alone anymore. Elias sat across from her, his eyes gentle, his smile faint. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Every heartbeat in her chest felt like his hand on hers. Around them, the others began to arrive, living and dead, side by side, in silence, in peace. As the great bell of the chapel began to toll, each toll echoed through the night, not just across the village, but deep into the misty woods, into the fields where no one had walked in centuries. And with every chime, more chairs filled, more shadows took form, more hearts remembered what they had lost, and what they had once loved. It was not a night of fear. It was a night of remembering, the kind that broke you and healed you at once. As the moon climbed high, and the wind whispered through the trees, Clara finally understood what the invitation meant. Bring what you cherish. Leave what you fear. It was never about death. It was about returning home. The clock struck midnight. The feast had begun, and in the silent village of Harrowfield, for the first time in centuries, the living and the dead breathed the same air and remembered what it meant to love. The moon stood high above Harrowfield, a pale lantern in an endless ocean of clouds. Its light spilled through the chapel windows, falling like silver rain across the long table that waited beneath. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The air itself seemed sacred, thick with the scent of candle wax, ash, and something older, sweeter, like wild honey mixed with memory. Clara sat at one end of the table, her trembling hands folded on her lap. Around her, the others gathered in silence. The villagers she had known all her life, and those she had lost long ago. Across from her, Elias smiled faintly, his face soft, glowing as if made of moonlight. He was exactly as she remembered. The same gray eyes, the same gentle curl in his hair, the same small scar above his left brow, where he had once fallen from the apple tree behind their house. He didn't speak, but she could feel him. Every movement of the air seemed to whisper his thoughts, like a language only her heart could hear. You came back, his presence said. You remembered the way home. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something deeper. The great table stretched farther than the eye could see. Some said it ended at the wall. Others swore it went on forever, through the veil between worlds. Every place at the table was filled, not just by bodies, but by echoes. Some seats shimmered with half-formed figures, some with the soft shape of light, and others with nothing but air, as though the memory of someone sat there, invisible but undeniable. Plates appeared, each one holding a dish that meant something. A childhood favorite, a meal once shared, a recipe long forgotten by the living. Before Thomas, the baker, lay a golden loaf of bread. He hadn't baked that shape in years. Round, with a hollow center filled with lavender honey. It was his grandmother's recipe, one he used to make with her as a boy. He reached for it slowly, and the moment his fingers touched the crust, a woman's laughter echoed beside him. Soft, warm, familiar. He turned, and there she was, his grandmother, her eyes twinkling like firelight, her apron dusted with flour that shimmered like starlight. You've grown thin, boy, she teased gently. Eat. The living always forget to eat. Thomas tried to speak, but his throat closed. Instead, he smiled and took a bite. It tasted exactly as it had 50 years ago. Sweet, earthy, real. For a heartbeat, he felt like a child again. Down the table, Mira and her little brother sat side by side. Before them appeared 2 silver bowls filled with milk and berries. And across from them, their parents, smiling faintly, their hands ghost-like but tender. Mira couldn't stop trembling. Her brother reached across the table, his tiny fingers passing right through their father's palm. But he giggled anyway. It's cold, he whispered. Their father's eyes softened. Cold doesn't mean gone. Mira closed her eyes. She could feel her mother's warmth in the air, not in touch, but in presence. Every heartbeat, every breath. A quiet reminder that love does not die. At the head of the table stood Father Elric. He raised his cup high, his voice steady, though his eyes glistened with tears. To memory, he said softly. To love that endures. To life that never truly ends. The candle flames shivered, and a low hum passed through the room. Not from the living, not from the dead, but from both at once. A sound like wind moving through hollow bones. Like the ocean inside a seashell. It was a harmony older than language. A song that belonged to the earth itself. The feast had begun. They did not eat for hunger, nor drink for thirst. They ate to remember. Each taste, each scent, each flicker of light became a thread, weaving the living and the dead together. And as the night deepened, the chapel began to change. The walls grew faint, the ceiling higher. Stars replaced the roof, and the air shimmered like water. The feast had crossed the threshold, no longer bound by wood or stone. It existed now between. Clara looked around her. Everywhere she turned, faces she hadn't seen in years smiled back. Some she remembered from her youth. A childhood friend who'd drowned in the river. A teacher who'd taught her to read. The old man who once played violin by the inn. They were all there. Their laughter soft, their eyes bright, as though they'd never left. And yet beneath it all, she could sense something deeper. A pulse beneath the joy. A whisper that threaded through every voice. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even sorrowful. It was yearning. The dead didn't want to haunt. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to be seen one last time. To remind the living that love was still alive in the dark. As midnight drew near, the lights dimmed, and a new sound began to rise. A soft, rhythmic beating. At first, Clara thought it was her own heart. Then she realized it was coming from beneath the table, the ground. It throbbed like something alive. A slow, steady heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the living. Elias reached for her hand. His touch was cold but kind. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice like wind in leaves. "The earth remembers what it holds." Clara looked down. Through the gaps in the wooden floor, she could see faint light pulsing, not from candles, but from the soil itself. The graves outside were glowing. One by one, the villagers rose from their seats, drawn to the rhythm beneath their feet. They walked outside, where the chapel doors opened on their own. The moon was full now, and the air shimmered like water. Every grave in the cemetery glowed softly, each one like a lantern made of memory. Clara walked to Elias's resting place. The stone was smooth and cold, but beneath it she could see his light. Gentle, golden, eternal. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias smiled, his voice barely a breath. "It always was. You just forgot how to see it." He placed his hand over hers. Their fingers didn't quite meet, but warmth passed between them. Real, undeniable. For the first time in decades, Clara didn't feel alone. Across the cemetery, the other villagers stood beside their lost ones. Some laughed softly, some cried, some simply stared, as the barrier between worlds grew thinner with every heartbeat. Above them, the stars brightened. The sky seemed to lean closer, as though the heavens themselves wanted to watch. And from far beyond, a voice, old as time, gentle as sleep, whispered through the wind. "The feast is not an ending. It is a remembering." The night grew quieter. The music faded. One by one, the ghostly figures began to rise like mist, their forms dissolving into starlight. Elias looked at Clara one last time. "When you wake," he said softly, "the table will be gone, but the feast will stay in your heart. Every act of kindness, every memory. That is how we return." She wanted to beg him to stay, but her lips refused to move. Some part of her knew this was how it had to be. So she only whispered, "I'll remember." He smiled, and then he was gone. By dawn, the candles had melted to pools of wax. The table was empty, the chapel silent once more. But something had changed. The village no longer felt cold. The air seemed lighter, the soil warmer beneath their feet. And for days afterward, the scent of bread, lilac, and honey lingered in the streets. The quiet reminder of a night when the dead came home, and love itself sat at the table. The morning arrived like a whisper. A soft wind stirred through Harrowfield, carrying the scent of rain and something sweeter, like warm bread and lilacs. The sun was pale, shy, barely awake, and the mist still clung to the rooftops as though reluctant to let go of the night. For the first time in many years, the village didn't wake with the sound of bells or footsteps. No one called out from the windows. No doors creaked open. Only silence, deep, tender, and full of memory. Clara sat by her window, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness, but her heart strangely light. She had not dreamed. Or maybe she had never truly woken up. Her kitchen table was empty, yet she could still see the faint outline of the letter that had started it all. The wax seal was gone. The paper vanished, but the faint scent of candle smoke lingered in the air, as if the invitation had burned itself back into the unseen world it came from. She touched the wood where it had once lain and whispered softly, "Thank you." Outside, the streets glimmered faintly under the thin morning sun. Tiny flecks of ash floated gently through the air, not dark or heavy, but light, like snow that glowed from within. The baker, Thomas, stepped out of his shop, his apron still dusted with flour. He paused, staring at the ground before him. There, right by his doorstep, lay a small, round loaf of bread, golden brown, shaped in the same hollow circle his grandmother once made. The same bread he had eaten the night before at the feast. He knelt down, his fingers trembling. It was warm, fresh, impossible. He smiled faintly, then lifted it to his face, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender honey. "You never really left, did you?" he murmured. A soft breeze brushed his cheek, a warmth that felt like a hand, gentle and quick. He looked up, and for a moment, swore he saw her, his grandmother's reflection in the bakery window, smiling, fading. At the chapel, the door stood wide open. The long table that had stretched into eternity was gone, but faint marks remained on the floor. Rings of candle wax, crumbs of bread, a silver cup turned on its side. Father Elric stood there, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly in prayer. The morning light spilled through the stained glass, casting soft colors across his face, blues, reds, golds. He whispered under his breath, "Not a sermon, but a confession. They only come when we forget," he said softly. "They remind us to remember. That's all they ever wanted." His voice broke, and tears fell, not of fear, but gratitude. For the first time in his life, he understood that faith was not about reaching heaven. It was about keeping love alive in the world of the living. By noon, the villagers began to gather. No one spoke at first. They just looked at one another, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared secret. The faces of the night still lingered in their minds. Fathers, mothers, lovers, children, friends. Some had seen them clearly. Some had only felt them nearby. A shadow, a scent, a whisper, but all had been touched by it. Mira stood with her little brother in her arms. He was smiling, holding a single white feather he'd found outside their door. "Mama left it," he said proudly, "so I won't forget her." Mira smiled through her tears. "Then keep it safe. She'll find you again when you dream." The boy nodded solemnly, as if he truly understood. As the day wore on, the mist began to lift, and something miraculous happened. Flowers began to bloom across the cemetery. Wildflowers of every color. White lilies, violet crocus, bluebells, and crimson poppies sprouted from the earth, not just near graves, but through the cracks in the chapel floor, along the fences, and even in the footprints that led down the road. No one had planted them. They simply appeared, as if the ground itself had decided to remember beauty again. The villagers walked among them quietly, their hearts swelling with wonder. Some knelt. Some picked a single flower to take home. Some just stood still and let the petals brush against their skin. The world felt alive, awake, forgiving. Clara wandered toward the hill, where Elias had once loved to sit and watch the sunsets. The grass was damp. The air smelled of earth and dew. When she reached the top, she found something waiting for her. A small wooden box, half buried in the soil. She knelt and brushed the dirt away. Inside was a single item, a pocket watch, old and rusted. Its glass cracked, but its hands still ticking. She gasped. It was Elias's. He had lost it the day before he died. Her hands shook as she held it. The second hand moved steadily, but the ticking sound was strange. Softer, slower, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. She pressed it to her chest, and suddenly, the world around her went quiet. The wind stopped. The birds paused mid-song, and in that stillness, she heard his voice. Time doesn't end where you think it does, he said. It only changes shape. She smiled, tears falling freely now. I miss you. Then remember me, he whispered, and I will never be gone. The wind stirred again, gentle and warm, and when she looked down, the pocket watch had stopped ticking, its hands frozen at midnight, the hour of the feast. By evening, the sky turned to gold. Children played near the chapel, their laughter echoing through the valley. For the first time in years, it didn't sound lonely. The villagers hung lanterns by their doors, not out of fear, but as a promise, a light for those who might wander home again next year. Father Elric called it the Night of Remembrance, but to everyone else, it was simply the morning after the feast. They didn't talk about ghosts. They didn't talk about miracles. They talked about love, the kind that endures beyond the grave, the kind that waits quietly, patiently, for the heart to notice it again. That night, Clara sat once more by her window. The moon had returned, soft and kind. The village slept peacefully. No whispers, no flickering lights, no strange music in the air, only calm. She placed Elias's watch on her bedside table, its silent face glinting in the moonlight. And just before she drifted to sleep, she thought she heard it again, a soft, familiar voice, gentle as breath. The feast is never over, Clara. It only waits for when love is remembered again. She smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, she slept without dreams, because in her heart, she was already home. The days after the feast passed like slow-moving clouds, gentle, calm, and full of meaning. Harrowfield Village was no longer the same. Something invisible, something tender had settled over it. A peace too quiet to name, a love too deep to measure. Every morning, the mist came a little later. The air felt warmer, kinder. Even the old clock tower, which had been silent for years, began to tick again, one beat at a time, like the heart of the village remembering how to live. Clara found herself walking more often. She'd visit the old oak tree by the chapel, sit in the same spot where she and Elias used to watch the moon rise. Sometimes she'd bring a book, sometimes just silence. But each time, the wind seemed to carry whispers, soft, melodic sounds that were neither language nor song. Yet somehow she understood. They weren't ghosts. They weren't voices of fear. They were echoes, echoes of love, still traveling between the worlds, refusing to fade. One evening, as the sky melted into a silver dusk, Clara met Thomas, the baker. He was standing outside his shop, hanging a small bell over the doorway. When she asked him about it, he smiled. For them, he said, so they'll know they're welcome. The bell was tiny, delicate, with little carvings of vines and stars. He told her he'd made it himself, melted from the silver cup left behind at the feast. Clara touched the bell gently. It shimmered under the moonlight, and for a second, she heard the faint sound of laughter, the kind that came from deep memories. Do you ever feel like they're still here? She asked quietly. Thomas nodded, his eyes soft. Every time I bake, every time I light a candle. They're not gone, Clara. They've just stepped into the quiet part of the world. She smiled at that. It was comforting to think that love didn't vanish. It just learned to whisper instead of speak. Weeks passed. Seasons began to turn. The flowers from the cemetery spread across the hillsides, and the villagers began leaving small offerings by the chapel door. A loaf of bread, a letter, a feather, a single flower. No one told them to. It just became part of life. And slowly, they noticed something miraculous. Whenever someone placed something with a pure heart, an act of love, not fear, the offering would be gone by morning. Not stolen, not taken, just gone. In its place, there'd always be a sign, a faint glow, a warm breeze, a whisper that felt like gratitude. The villagers began to call it the Echo's gift. One day, Father Elric gathered everyone in the chapel. The air smelled of melted wax and fresh bread. He looked older, but lighter, like a man who had finally made peace with mystery. We feared the dead for too long, he said softly. But they never wanted fear. They wanted remembrance. They wanted love, the kind that crosses the dark and finds its way home. He paused, looking at the candle flames flickering along the altar. So, every year, on the night of the feast, we will light a candle for them, not to summon, but to honor, not to mourn, but to thank. And thus, the first Night of Echoes was born. It was not a celebration of death. It was a promise that love remembered never truly dies. Clara became the keeper of the tradition. Each year, she would write a new letter, one not meant to be sent, but meant to be read by the stars. Sometimes she wrote to Elias, sometimes to her parents, sometimes to no one at all. Her words were soft as prayer, and the night always answered back, with a gentle wind, a flicker of candlelight, a heartbeat beneath the silence. She started keeping those letters in a small wooden box, the same one that once held Elias's watch. Inside it, she placed little mementos too, a piece of ribbon, a wilted flower, a feather, a torn photograph. Over the years, the box became heavy, not with sorrow, but with memory. And every time she opened it, she felt him there, not as a ghost, but as warmth. Children grew up hearing the stories. They would ask their parents about the feast. What was it like? Did the spirits really come? Were you scared? But no one ever described it as something dark. Instead, they said, it was like love taking form. It was like a dream that felt more real than waking. Some nights, when the moon was full and the wind gentle, children would place tiny bells on their windowsills, hoping to hear them ring softly in the night. And sometimes, just sometimes, they did. Years passed. The world outside changed. Roads were built. Houses grew. The chapel aged. But inside the hearts of the villagers, the tradition lived on. Even travelers began to hear about it. The Night of Echoes, a sacred evening in a small hidden village, where love and death met not as enemies, but as companions. Poets wrote about it. Artists painted it. But no one outside Hereford ever truly captured its soul. Because it wasn't about the feast, or the ghosts, or the flowers. It was about the echo, the lingering vibration of love that refused to fade away. One autumn night, many years later, an old woman sat by her window, watching the moon rise over the quiet valley. Her hair was silver now, her eyes soft but bright. On her bedside table, the pocket watch still lay, unticking, unmoving, yet full of quiet life. She opened the window, letting the cold night air in. The sound of the wind carried faint laughter, and for a moment, the world shimmered, as though two realms had brushed against each other. Clara smiled. "Elias," she whispered, "the feast is tonight. Will you come?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of presence, of love, of memory. And then, ever so softly, the watch ticked once. Just once. She laughed, wiping a tear. "Then I'll keep the candle burning for you." Later that night, as the village glowed with hundreds of tiny flames, Clara sat beneath the old oak tree, her candle flickering beside her. The stars above shimmered brighter than ever before, and she could almost see them, shapes moving through the mist, smiling, waving, shimmering like reflections on water. The air felt alive, humming softly, like a song carried across time. And then, from somewhere deep within the stillness, a familiar voice whispered, "The echo of love never fades. It only waits for the heart to listen again." She closed her eyes, smiling through her tears, and whispered back, "I'm listening." The candle flame danced once, then stilled, and Hereford, the little village of the feast, slept peacefully under the moon, bathed in the eternal echo of love. The village of Hereford had changed again. Years had passed since the night when Clara's candle burned under the old oak tree. Time had softened everything, the roads, the people, even the stones of the chapel. But one thing never changed. Every window in the village still held a candle. Every flame still whispered her name. They called it Clara's light. It wasn't a ritual anymore. It was love, quiet, unspoken, yet always present, like a breath the village shared with the world beyond. On a winter evening, when snow covered the rooftops like soft feathers, a young girl named Alara sat by her window, watching her candle flicker in the cold wind. She had heard the stories all her life, of the feast of spirits, of the echo of love, of the woman who kept her candle burning until the end. Her grandmother used to tell her those tales before bed, voice soft and musical, like a lullaby wrapped in mystery. "The candle by the window," her grandmother would say, "is not just a light, my dear. It's a promise, that love never truly leaves. It just waits in the glow. Alara believed it. Deep inside, she felt something stir each time the flame danced, as if someone was watching, not in fear, but in warmth. That night, as snow fell silently over Hereford, Alara couldn't sleep. The wind outside hummed through the cracks in the wooden walls, and the bell from the old chapel rang softly, though no one had touched it. She rose from her bed, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and walked to the window. The candle still burned, small, steady, golden. But beyond the glass, the world was silver and still. The village looked like a dream wrapped in moonlight. And then she saw it. A faint figure under the oak tree. Not frightening, not ghostly, just luminous. It stood quietly, hands folded, looking toward her window. Alara's heart skipped, not out of fear, but recognition. She whispered, "Clara." The figure didn't answer, but the candle's flame swayed, as though the air itself had smiled. For the first time, Alara opened the window. Cold wind rushed in, but it carried a scent, lavender and something older, like parchment in time. The flame flickered, but did not die. And then, in a voice that was more feeling than sound, she heard, "Keep the light, child. The world forgets too easily, but love remembers." Alara nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. The figure faded slowly, like a memory gently returning to silence. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake carrying a shimmer of light. By morning, the villagers found something strange. The snow around the old oak tree hadn't settled. It had melted in a perfect circle, as though someone had been standing there, radiating warmth in the heart of winter. Alara told no one what she saw, but that evening, she placed a second candle beside her own, one for herself and one for Clara. The glow filled her small room with a peace that words could never hold. As the years went on, Alara grew into a gentle young woman, known for her kindness and the way she listened when others spoke of loss. People said that when she smiled, it felt like sunlight passing through clouds. Every night, her candles still burned, one for the living, one for the gone, and slowly, others began doing the same. The candle by the window became the new tradition, not just in Hereford, but in every nearby village touched by its story. No one remembered how it started. They only knew it brought peace. One spring evening, Alara found an old box buried beneath the chapel floorboards. Inside it was a faded letter sealed with red wax. The paper smelled of dust and lavender. She opened it carefully. It was written in elegant handwriting, gentle and trembling. The last letter of Clara, to the one who will find this. I have kept my light burning all my life, not for the dead, but for the love that binds us beyond death. When you find this, promise me you will not let the flame go dark. Keep it alive, and it will keep you alive, in ways you cannot yet understand. Alara pressed the letter to her chest. The candle by her window flickered softly, as if responding to the words. That night, she dreamed of a field filled with candles, millions of tiny flames stretching into infinity. Each one was a life, a memory, a heartbeat. And there, in the center of the field, stood Clara, smiling, holding the same watch that had once ticked for Elias. The light never dies, Alara, she said. It travels from one heart to another. When Alara woke, her pillow was damp with tears, but she was smiling. She wrote a new letter that morning. Dear Clara, I found your words. I'll keep the candle burning, not just for you, but for everyone who ever loved and lost. And maybe, one night, someone will light one for me too. She folded the letter and placed it under the candle. The wax dripped over the paper, sealing it like a quiet vow. Decades passed. Alara grew old, her hair silver like the moon, but her window always glowed, even when she could no longer walk. Villagers came to light her candle for her. The children who once played in her garden grew up and told their own children, never forget the candle by the window. It's how the world remembers kindness. And on the night she left the world, no one cried. They simply lit every candle in Hereford. The valley shimmered with gold, and for a moment, it looked like the stars had come down to rest on earth. In that light, a faint whisper moved through every home. Thank you for keeping the flame. Years later, travelers who passed through Hereford would always stop at night. They'd look at the thousands of candles burning in the windows and ask, "What is this place?" And the innkeeper would smile, placing a small candle in front of them. "This is Hereford," he'd say, "where the living light candles for the dead, and the dead guide the living home." They never asked again. They simply lit the candle. And somewhere, in the quiet between breaths, they felt love echo back. Far above, beyond the hills and clouds, two figures watched the village glow, Clara and Elias. Hand in hand, their faces warm in the light. "Do you see?" Elias whispered. "They kept your promise." Clara smiled softly, her voice a shimmer in the starlight. "No, love, they kept ours." And below them, a single candle flickered brighter than the rest, the one by Alara's window, still burning, still whispering. The light never dies. The lake outside Hereford was ancient. It slept between the hills like a mirror made of dreams. Calm, silver, endless. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and heavy, the water looked like liquid glass, and if one stood still enough, they could see not only their reflection, but the faint shimmer of something else, something alive beneath the surface, like forgotten memories breathing in rhythm with the tide. No one went near the lake after dark, not because it was feared, but because it was sacred. It was said that the souls who crossed the bridge between worlds rested there, not trapped, not gone, but waiting, like lanterns beneath the water. Alara had gone. Her candle had burned its last, but her light, like Clara's before her, remained. It was the first spring after her passing. The air smelled of rain and wildflowers, and the people of Hereford decided that this year, the candles would not stay by the windows. They would be carried to the lake. The villagers gathered quietly at dusk. Children carried small wooden lanterns, their glass panes painted with gentle swirls and stars. The older ones held candles wrapped in cloth, protected from the wind. No one spoke much. Words felt too heavy, too human. This night belonged to silence, to memory and the soft hum of the earth. As the sun slipped behind the hills, Father Elric's successor, a young woman named Mara, stepped forward. Her voice was low and musical, each word floating like mist. "Tonight, we return the light to where it began, to the lake, where the veil between worlds grows thin, and love flows freely between them." Hand in hand, their faces warm in the light. "Do you see?" Elias whispered. "They kept your promise." Clara smiled softly, her voice a shimmer in the starlight. "No, love, they kept ours." And below them, a single candle flickered brighter than the rest, the one by Alara's window, still burning, still whispering. The light never dies. The lake outside Hereford was ancient. It slept between the hills like a mirror made of dreams. Calm, silver, endless. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and heavy, the water looked like liquid glass, and if one stood still enough, they could see not only their reflection, but the faint shimmer of something else, something alive beneath the surface, like forgotten memories breathing in rhythm with the tide. No one went near the lake after dark, not because it was feared, but because it was sacred. It was said that the souls who crossed the bridge between worlds rested there, not trapped, not gone, but waiting, like lanterns beneath the water. Alara had gone. Her candle had burned its last, but her light, like Clara's before her, remained. It was the first spring after her passing. The air smelled of rain and wildflowers, and the people of Hereford decided that this year, the candles would not stay by the windows. They would be carried to the lake. The villagers gathered quietly at dusk. Children carried small wooden lanterns, their glass panes painted with gentle swirls and stars. The older ones held candles wrapped in cloth, protected from the wind. No one spoke much. Words felt too heavy, too human. This night belonged to silence, to memory and the soft hum of the earth. As the sun slipped behind the hills, Father Elric's successor, a young woman named Mara, stepped forward. Her voice was low and musical, each word floating like mist. "Tonight, we return the light to where it began, to the lake, where the veil between worlds grows thin, and love flows freely between them."